I really would say to the listeners, the reason why you want to listen to this podcast particularly is we were talking about an issue that is so tantamount to what is happening in our world today, not only to solve problems, but just to get a hold of what artificial intelligence is, how to understand it, and what entry level you come in, right? So AI Planet is, doing what, Beth? I mean, what did you hear about AI Planet
AI
today?
Planet, well, it's the place to start. I looked into it quite a bit before the podcast today because I wanted to, learn a little more.
Do our homework, as we always do as responsible podcast people. Hello,
Oh,
obviously.
absolutely. I mean, clearly.
We do hours of research on this show, folks.
We do at times. And, what I love about it is that it is available and open to everybody. Anybody, even people like yours truly, who, what I know about coding can fit on a postage stamp. I know nothing about it, so to me, it's all kind of new, but it's so important. This is such a huge transition. I have to tell this little story. We've been rewatching Stranger Things with our teenagers because they wanted to, and
it's the hottest show ever. I mean, obviously, it brought back Kate Bush.
Yeah, thank goodness. I mean, hello, anything that honors Kate, we'll take it. But we were on the episode where they're at Susie's house. Susie is Dustin's genius girlfriend that lives in Utah, and she was trying to help them figure out a location that they needed to get to, and they're trying to call into this computer, and it's all very new because it's 1986, and they're asking her, "What are you doing?" And she goes, "I'm just using the internet." And one of the guys goes, "Well, what's the internet?" And she goes, "Nothing. It's just going to change the world." So, that's what I feel like AI is. And so you and I, Sky, have already lived through this transition with the internet. I mean,
I was going back in time and I was watching these YouTube videos about the internet, and they had so many warnings. Like, there were so many shows back in our time, back in our day, back in old times when we dialed up with the dial up.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it was like, I mean, there were so many fears around the internet. Of course, a lot of them came true. I mean, look at, we actually run democracies now on Twitter, basically, which is, who could ever envision that? I think the next step with this conversation with AI is that we're probably going to have AI agents running our government at some point in time, or at least AI firms that will create software that will run much of what we see as governance in the future, which I think is the next step. We did not get to talk about that on the show today, but we did get to talk about a lot of philosophical, humanistic.
We really went there. And, there were a lot of warnings about the internet, and this is the thing about AI. It kind of could go in any direction at this point, right? And so like Paolo and Chanukya said, we are kind of at the forefront. What we put into the AI is what it will create it to be. And some of it is just not being aware, having the education to know that it is how it's going to affect our lives, right? Like, of course, a lot of people have no idea that Twitter is manipulated or Facebook is manipulated. They think, oh, this is just my friends and I having a conversation. Well, not really.
Like the world algorithm. I mean, that just sort of popped up out of nowhere with all of us that didn't know about technology. And it was like, oh yeah, algorithms run our lives now. The computer knows more than you know now. It knows how to tell you what show to watch and who to follow. And,
There's some new music you'll really love. But that's what AI can be for us, though. And we can make it into and use it as a tool, just like anything else, for the positive things that we prefer, right? I mean, we talked about that.
Which Paolo mentioned as well. It was amazing. He held that space for us that was about play and getting really empowered. Like, can we use these tools to empower, not to enslave, right? But to liberate. And I think that's definitely the course and action that we're trying to promote here as well, is like, get involved, because if you're not involved, then you're a slave. If you're not, you're a slave to the people who are shaping the future. You mentioned capitalism on the show as well. And monetization of these tools, and how that does, create more of like enslaving energy, right? And the liberation energy would be that, like, these tools should help free us from work. They should help us spend more time with our families and doing self healing and introspection and dance and sing, the things that Paolo was mentioning. So,
and interestingly, both of our guests, Paolo's sort of a guest and sort of a host. He's both. They both, in part of their closing statements, said, be curious about this. new technology. So, that has a really positive connotation to me, learning more about it and what could it do to enhance my life? How could it make me healthier? How could it help my, learning about new things or my children's education or whatever? I just think we need to put more oxygen on that and less oxygen on AI is going to take over the world. And
there was a stress in this podcast to ask the right questions,
Yeah.
And I think that goes for anything, right? You and I, we were raised in a religious context. Thankfully, we were not barred, like many religions, to ask questions. We are actually encouraged to ask questions. But it's not a very good thing to ask a question like, how is this, my life, or, focusing on the problem talk. I mean, Birch was really good at that too, talking about solution questions, How can this improve our lives? How can this empower what we already are, which was also very much part of this conversation. Well, you want to listen in because this is about augmenting AI for accessibility, right? Bring everyone to the table. That was the conversation we had. And using what we already have. I mean, we're fantastic creatures. We created this AI thing. So it's like this idea that because we are in a state where we are right now, that there's some fear that we already have created a world that's kind of messed up, right, from our current state. So there is a fear that AI could just basically, amplify that, right? So we do want to bring out the best in us, bring out the best questions, get them to the table, bring the best people to the table, lots of diverse people, which was mentioned in the podcast as well. Yeah.
Because it's true, as I was thinking, as we were having that discussion about gender diversity and global diversity in the world of coding and technology in general, I was thinking about how it feels like every technology that has come along, for the most part, the development behind it has been men, largely white men, not exclusively. Okay, there's a lot of exceptions to this, but, how would that look different if more women were here at the start? And I do see, to the world's credit, educational institutions and corporations and stuff, they all have programs to encourage girls and women to become involved in these sciences. So it is a thing.
And it's not just for gender's sake either, because some of the listeners will be like, oh, well, here we go with this women conversation again. And but I think my pushback on that usually is kind of, it's always been one thing, right? And we never questioned that. So, it can go both ways. We do need to have some women at the table. It's not just because they're women. It's because we've never had this discussion before. I mean, it's only one thing. So
we're half of humanity, and what it has been forever has just been kind of like a male conversation,
right?
On these topics in this area of the world. And all it does is and the same thing with global diversity. It just adds more voices to the table, more information. And as we were talking about how AI is trained and how we create it, it's information. So we want to be, providing the best, most complete information as we go forward.
And how lucky were we to have people on the show today who were Indian national and Mexican national, and then also live in Sweden and Belgium now, quite international. So it's really great to see people who are joining the conversation who have also had, multiple roots, diverse backgrounds that are very different than you and I, who were the United States. And I'm
just me.
You will not want to miss this conversation today with Chanukya and also Paolo, who came on to talk about AI. And Beth, I think particularly, for people like you said, you're an educator, you're a community leader as well yourself in the church, you're a mom, you're a wife, maybe you're a sister, you're a daughter, you're all the things. But, one thing I know from knowing you is that you're not really AI person. Like the average listener.
Yeah, it's not something that, like you were talking about in our discussion, how you've used AI to augment your work and your life. I really have not at all. It's just not been something that I have seen as a necessity for me. It's not necessary for my work. But at the same time, because I'm kind of aware of what's happening in the world, I know it's going to become a huge part of our civilization. And I do have a history degree, so I think about things in the big picture sometimes. And as far as I'm concerned, learning about AI is just me reading future history. That's all it is.
Ooh, I love that. And also, I mean, Beth, like where, because this is great for the listeners. Like, what is the there's a gap and a barrier we discussed on the podcast today. Like, what is keeping you from jumping in? For instance, like for the podcast that we have going on, this has helped in season 3 totally eliminate so much work for me, right? Like, and for us,
right.
and
Absolutely.
and the
Yeah,
team.
especially
So, and so what would be talk to the average listener out there. Like, there's a gap. You haven't started using it in work yet. You haven't replicated. You haven't made 4 Beths, which we need. We need 4. We need 10 Beths or 100 of them.
The world needs a really lot of me. Okay. All right.
So, like,
friends,
what's stopping you from jumping?
Friends, regular people, cozy up. Here's the thing. So the reason I haven't jumped into it is because, 1, I didn't think it's something that's necessary for me. And 2, I would have had no idea where to go if I wanted to learn more. Like, what would I read? A Time magazine article? That's not really what I'm talking about. If I wanted to learn enough to use it myself, I didn't really have a good idea of where to go. I do now. Now I know that there's this resource, that's totally available for me or anybody else. And it's funny because the one area that I have used AI that I think applies to every human being on the planet is I have used the health AIs, right? Like, to try to determine different health conditions, and you talk about your symptoms and they ask you more questions. And anyway, that's
they're better at the memory. I just was reading an article. They're actually better than doctors at detecting mammary scans for breast cancer, which is incredible.
It's just putting more. I mean, even just the discussing symptoms piece of it. Like, I'll put in a whole bunch of totally disparate symptoms that have nothing to do with each other in my mind that I can't figure out. And the AI is like, okay, that's pointing us in this direction, but let me ask some more questions. And then in the end of the day, it gives you a very likely answer and a possible answer and a less probable answer. So that's something that every person on the planet, we all have to take care of our health. So maybe you don't need it for whatever your work is. Maybe you have like a very physical job, you're a landscaper or something. Maybe you don't need it, but I'm the host now because someone disappeared. Anyway, everybody join in this week. You're going to absolutely love this podcast. What a great conversation. It will make you think, and it will make you hopefully take stock of where you can learn more as we make some future history moving onwards and upwards.